And welcome to another episode of 50 Shades and Grey. Thank you for joining us. Today I'm sitting with the lovely Kate Rowe-Ham. Kate is a menopause and fitness coach. She's also an author, a speaker and a podcaster. And her business is Owning Your Menopause. She's got 80,000 followers now on Instagram. So Kate, good morning.
Good morning. Nice to see you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining me. The first question that I've got for you is what's been your journey to this point? So how did this all start?
Yeah. Firstly, thank you so much for having me on. I think it's really important to include men in the conversation. So I'm grateful for your invitation. I will try to keep my journey short because it was a fairly long one in understanding what was happening to me. But I guess if I start around about the age of 41, I'd just had my third child. So, a sort of a later pregnancy, geriatric pregnancy is actually what they call it. I thought that the symptoms that I had were perhaps related to being a mum of three, having a young child, and I didn't really understand. I myself didn't know anything about perimenopause, menopause. So kind of to cut a long story short, my symptoms were crippling joint aches and pains, terrible night sweats, anger at my husband, my children, everybody, that I was not great to probably be around. But I would go to the doctors and breathlessness was one of my worst, and like heart palpitations. And I went to the GP and they just sort of asked me about my life. They thought it was depression. A lot of women do get diagnosed with depression or misdiagnosed with depression when it's perimenopause. But I'm quite a good advocate for my own health. And I sort of knew that it wasn't that. So I carried on doing the research. And eventually I slowly began to put like the pieces of the puzzle together and work out what I was experiencing was some not so great symptoms of perimenopause. But because the narrative around, menopause, perimenopause is very much that of somebody who is frail, perhaps grey haired, sort of in their late 50s and 60s, I hadn't felt represented. And so I really didn't understand that that's what it was. And slowly, and I know we'll come on to that, by making some lifestyle changes, I managed to completely and utterly transform my life. And that is, I guess, how I found myself here, because I do not want my journey, my story and my narrative to be that of my daughters, and in particular to be that of the many women that I work with. And I'm still finding that they aren't getting the help or access to the more sort of holistic side of managing the menopause.
Okay, so some of the symptoms that you described there, are they symptoms that are common, or has everyone got their own symptoms?
Yeah, really good question. There are probably now around, I think when I started going through menopause, I think it was 34 symptoms. I think there are now like 60 plus symptoms. So it can be really confusing because every woman's journey is unique. Also, a lot of the time their symptoms won't necessarily show up at the same time. So, when you've sort of, maybe you've been having sleepless nights and then suddenly you're sleeping, but then you're having something else, you don't necessarily that each one of those things is the same for the same thing. So the most common symptoms and the most ones that we talk about obviously are those hot flushes. But for me, I didn't have those. I think that is the problem, is that we haven't focused, again, like these, and I know we'll come on to it, but musculoskeletal and joint aches and pains are really prevalent in women navigating menopause because of the decline of estrogen. And again, that's not something we talk about. So what I find with a lot of women that I work with is they're having these crippling joint aches and pains. They stop working out, they gain weight, they feel more lethargic, they don't have any energy, they lose self-confidence. So, sort of all these things kind of play into each other. So what I would say to any woman listening from the age of plus 35 is to start tracking symptoms, to start tracking things, and to talk to people about what you are experiencing, and to not be afraid of talking about it, because menopause is a natural stage in a woman's life and it is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. And there should be no taboo, there should be no stigma surrounding it. And again, being totally transparent, for a lot of women, and I know we'll come on to this, their relationships suffer because they can get uterine symptoms, they can get vaginal dryness, which then plays into their relationships, and all of these things happen. And again, so many women are so embarrassed about talking about these things, and like we really, really shouldn't be. So I think that, as I say, everyone's symptoms can be different. Start tracking, start monitoring, and please don't be afraid of whatever symptom seems to be happening, because you're so much better off getting help.
So how can you, for a woman that's sitting listening to this now, how can you make the distinction between, say you are suffering with mild depression, how can you make the distinction between, right, you're just suffering with mild depression as opposed to this is part of the menopause, or do they tend to go hand in hand?
Yeah, again, great question. I think, obviously I'm not medical, so it's really important if you are having any negative thoughts, you are feeling depressed, that you do reach out to your GP. What I would say, and perhaps this is a good point to sort of make out, is that perimenopause is around about 10 to 12 years, is that journey. And that's a real roller coaster. That's when your hormones are all over the place. They're coming, they're going, they're dipping, they're diving. Menopause is actually one day. So it's the day after you haven't had your periods for a year, and then you're postmenopausal. So it's really important. People say, I'm in menopause. I mean, menopause is the one day. So you're sort of peri, menopause, and post quite quickly. And that doesn't mean to say that those symptoms change significantly, but just in terms of that transition, it's really important. In terms of that mood, if you have suffered previously from depression, research does show that that is likely to be perhaps one of your bigger symptoms coming into this life stage. But I think also what's really important to point out is that with the decline of estrogen, which is all over our body, this affects our mood, this affects our ability to be able to cope, it affects our cortisol, it affects our insulin resistance, it affects every kind of metabolic function that is helping you manage life, day-to-day life. So in this midlife phase, when we are challenged, young adults, we're parenting young adults, we might have elderly or sick parents, we might be feeling loss of confidence, and when we don't feel happy in our job, we don't feel happy in our relationship because we're going through these symptoms. Often we are going to have low mood if all of those things are happening. And before, when we had this high estrogen that enabled us to cope with those challenges, for some reason we can't anymore. And so we begin to sort of doubt ourselves. And I think that isn't necessarily sort of depression, but it's a symptom of menopause. So I think it's really important to sort of distinguish between the two. And certainly my own experience of that, literally in the point of my biggest perimenopause, my dad was actually diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and I was his main carer. And I was driving to take him to chemotherapy. My son actually had a lung condition. So I was literally like this, and I couldn't cope, and the overwhelm was enormous. But normally, throw whatever at me and I've got it. And I think for me, that was one of my biggest indications that I really needed to start addressing what was going on. But I knew that it wasn't depression. I just knew that it was like those challenges. So I think, again, going back to like tracking and noting how you're feeling and journaling and, just having those conversations with friends can really help. Because, if you say to someone, this is how I'm feeling, they might say, well, you're under a lot of stress and you're doing all of this, and then you might feel a little bit more able to cope if you've shared your problem.
So you mentioned in there that from from the age of 35, so it can start as young as that, because I think, like you said before, I mean, I'm being perfectly honest, as we spoke before we came on, my knowledge of menopause was probably only sort of 6-7 years ago, when my friends' wives started to talk about it, and I had no knowledge of it whatsoever, mainly because I wasn't in a serious relationship then. So you haven't got those conversations that you're having. It could early as 35 now, because it used to be seen, I think, as a much older sort of age that you might start going into this.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I say 35 is because different demographics will go through their menopause at different stages. So women of colour and South Asian women can go through menopause earlier. So it's really important that we highlight that, everybody will go through a menopause at a different stage. And that can be very dependent on your ethnicity. So I think that is really key to point out. Also, kind of, if we look at how our body changes, our bone density peaks at the age of 30 and our muscle mass declines at the age of 35 after the age of 35 at a rate of 3 to 5%. So we're beginning to have these changes, and that is due to for women predominantly their change in hormones. So if I start saying 35, that enables women to start taking control of their hormones kind of before they hit that real crux of perimenopause, because the women I work with, often it literally hits them like a train, and it's like, where did that come from? Where did that perimenopause, or where did this menopause come from? But it has been building, really from about the age of 35. I mean, if we look behind the kind of science, as I say, I was diagnosed, or not diagnosed, I was labeled as a geriatric mother being pregnant at 39. You are a geriatric mother from the age of 35 on records from the NHS. So, there is an indication there that from 35, really, our body is beginning to potentially make these changes. Menopause, or sort of the average age of menopause, is 51. And if we are perimenopause for 10 to 12 years, you can see how we might start to get those symptoms in our late 30s, early 40s. And again, I think that myth is a myth that it is in your, late 50s, 60s. I think what people used to kind of talk about as the menopause was the day of menopause. It's only really recently, thanks to people like Davina, Lisa Snowdon, Gabby Logan, all of the celebrities talking about their own menopause, that we're elevating this sort of perimenopause phase, which is actually the most tumultuous time, but equally being positive, because that's what I really want women to know, is that it doesn't have to be doom and gloom. Is if we can get a hold of it and we start implementing the things that we need to do from the age of 35, we could potentially offset some of those risks that I've talked about, brittle bone, osteoporosis. We can maintain our muscle mass, and just feel a little bit stronger with the life challenges that might lie ahead.
I want to come to sort of those things that you think are really important to start doing. It was a conversation with my mum actually yesterday, because I was talking about we're going to do this today. And my mum now is 70. No, God, she's 83 now. Looks great for her age. And she was like, I never went through menopause. She said, I didn't get it. She said, I took evening primrose and B2, and I think that really helped me. So, do you think there was a generation where there just wasn't that awareness that there is now, that probably went through it, but just didn't realise, and it was in a time when nothing was spoken?
Yeah, totally. I think there was a lot of, they put up with it. They just got on with it. And, it's interesting because my mum would say that she didn't go through menopause either. Yes, she did take HRT, but she says that she took HRT because it was sort of this elixir of youth. It was meant to make you feel young, that wasn't really spoken about as being taken for your sort of your hormone health or for symptoms. But when I look back, and I know she won't mind me saying, my parents did get divorced possibly when my mum was at the crux of her perimenopause, and that will most likely be to perhaps the way she was feeling, their own relationship. So I think that, yes, I think that a lot of women in that older generation, they got on with it. They perhaps didn't realise it wasn't spoken about. I think also the reason we talk about it more and there's more help is because we are living longer. So we are in that post-menopausal phase of life for a lot longer. And so, I mean, I guess my question is, why should women live feeling mediocre for that second part of their life? Like, we absolutely should be able to do everything that we can do in our 60s and our 70s, from our 40s, 50s. We should still be able to lift weights. We want to be strong. We want to be mobile. We want to have great relationships. But I definitely think, as you say, if you were to dive really deep, now that we know there are 60 symptoms of menopause, your mum might just suddenly go, oh my God, yeah, Elliot, yeah, there was that and there was that. Because really for them, my mum is 70, 76. It was hot flushes. I don't think probably they talked about much more other than that. So,
No.
if you weren't having a hot flush, you probably weren't considered in menopause. But yeah, and it's really important that actually your mum, my mum, these women who are post-menopause, because they are lifting weights, they are moving their body, because muscle mass is the key to longevity and living well. And so I think that these conversations that you and I are having are really important from people, like literally even my daughter who's 15, 16. She should be lifting weights. She should be thinking about, and they won't, right, because we're all invincible at 15, but thinking about future health and what does that look like, and how do I become that strongest version, so that, you know, I had to care for my dad, and I don't mind having to do that. But you know, for my parents to live well, and like one of my biggest reasons to move my body is I want to be able to live independently for as long as possible. I want to be able to get off the loo on my own for as long as possible.
Yeah. That ties in sort of quite nicely to what one of the other things I wanted to talk about as well, because there's a lot now about like positive body image. And I think they're conversations where it's almost where people are accepting that, you know, it's okay if they're not exercising, and that they maybe slightly bigger, and saying, yeah, it's a positive body image. And I think the lines are getting blurred now between, like, you need to still stay active and stay fit. Yeah, we're all different sizes, granted. And being in that profession myself as well with PE, I spend my life saying to kids, got to keep active. You know, we want you doing this. This is something, it's a lifestyle that you've got to maintain. We also want positive body images where say, you know, if you're not as slim as that girl, or you're bigger than this, that's absolutely fine, because we want you to be happy in your body. But everything's sort of becoming a little bit blurred now. Do you find that?
Yeah, do you know what? It's interesting. I mean, you look at the Olympics now, and you look at all of the women and their body shapes, and they are all strong. They are all representing how I believe the narrative should be towards young girls now, which is actually your shape and your size does not determine your strength, your worth, any of that. But you need to be moving your body. So I think that you absolutely hit the nail on the head in terms of all of that. Like what we do know now, and it does worry me, is we are, you know, the sort of the rate of type 2 diabetes is the highest it has ever been. Obesity in this country is the highest it has ever been. And that is a real concern, especially kind of with women that I work with, because postmenopausally, well, actually dementia is now the biggest killer, but heart disease was for a number of years. So, you know, my message, and I think because I had disordered eating growing up, I always felt that I had to be a certain shape, and that had to be tiny to be able to be seen and to be successful. I am so intent on saying to women, you know, I actually had a message this morning on Instagram saying, you know, what I did in my 20s and my 30s, I'm not losing weight as much. Don't focus on losing the weight, okay? And I totally support any woman who wants to lose weight. And I think that, you know, if you have been diagnosed with pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, you are on slightly, you know, on the larger side and obese, you want to lose weight, that is absolutely fine. Because I feel what's happened is people now feel ashamed to even say they want to lose weight, because they get kind of like, well, why do you want to lose weight? Like everybody has to have their own reason, and they are totally entitled to that. But the women I work with, what I want them to focus on is their joint health, is their bone health, is their brain health, is their mental health, is their muscle health. Focusing on all of those, you will lose weight. Not only will you lose weight, but you'll build a sustainable and an achievable, you know, exercise routine. Because if you start these things like new year, new me, you know, you get up and you run like 5K and you can't walk the next day, you're done. Day 3, you know, we give up on something that we've set ourselves up for. So if we set long term, and I don't even say achievable goals, like literally my goal is to like walk out of here, you know, so I don't kind of have this like end. My end is my death. My end is going out of here strong and mobile. I mean, obviously, you know, that might not happen. But, you know, instead of saying I want to be a size this in 6 weeks or 4 weeks, which places, again, unrealistic stress on us. We're dealing with so much. We're not gonna do it. But kind of in answer to your question about that, I think that I want every woman to be comfortable with herself. But I know that in feeling strong, you can really find like so much comfortability. And, you know, I am the strongest and the fittest I've ever been, having just turned 48. And, you know, when I look back and I think what I'd like to say to my 25, 30-year-old self is that, you know, I think Kate Moss said nothing feels as good as skinny, but like nothing feels as good as strong. Is what I would have liked my 25-year-old person to have known.
I was going to use the same quote myself actually before I went into that. But so for that, three things that obviously there may be more than three things, but if you could pick a few things that are really important to start doing to start that journey for someone in terms of fitness, or what would they be? What would your starting points be?
Lift weights, like absolutely go out there and lift weights. And for any women listening, do not be afraid that by dropping your cardio, like your HIIT workouts, which will be stressing your body, and lifting weights, you will gain weight. You might have a moment of, transition whilst your body is adjusting to the new way that you're working out. But, HIIT can be, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, and there definitely is a place for it, but it can put a little bit more stress on the body. It can leave you open to a few more aches and pains. So lift weights. And when I say lift weights, I mean heavy weights, but obviously start slowly. It's not going to happen overnight. So just gradually build a routine where you are lifting heavy weights 3 to 4 times a week. Absolute game changer. My second one would be eat. Sorry.
It's only that's quite interesting actually, because obviously, like I said, sort of being in that industry as well, I'm surprised you said heavy weights, because I would have thought it would have just been sort of more reps, lighter weights with more reps. So is it more the case now of just doing less reps with heavier weight?
Yeah, absolutely that. So again, low weights, more reps has a place, but that just builds muscle endurance. If we go with heavy weights and lower reps, we're building overall muscle mass and muscle strength. And obviously that's what we want. Muscle, our muscle is the sort of largest organ. I mean, I know we've got skin in the body, and the more lean muscle mass we have, which we will build by lifting heavy weights and lower reps, that, as I said earlier, is the key to longevity. So the more lean muscle mass we have will help us balance our blood sugar levels, which can go a little bit awry. Again, in menopause, it helps with mobility, it helps with balance, it helps with strength. It actually burns, again, not that we're focusing on weight, but you burn more calories the more lean muscle you have, because it's a metabolically active tissue. It helps with dementia. It helps with cardiovascular disease. Like your lean muscle mass, you can't look to be building it more. And obviously the only way you do that is, as I say, lift heavy weights, and don't be afraid. You're not going to bulk up, I think, is the thing that stops a lot of women from lifting heavy.
Yeah, because that would have been my immediate thought, and that people would say, well, I don't want to look like I lift weights, because you will bulk up. But if you're only doing it a couple of times a week, I don't think you've got the regularity to actually do that anyway.
Oh my God, I'm so not bulky, and I lift. I just bought 17.5 kgs, which I will chest press with one on each arm. Back squats, not bulky. We're not going to bulk up. There's no way in the world, unless we're on a good old weightlifting program or bodybuilding program, are we going to build up and get bulky. But like, kind of coming on to that, like, having talked about the lifting weights, like, my second thing would be, and this is the one thing I see with so many women, is that they're not eating enough, and they're not eating enough protein. So they default to kind of the old habits that many of us perhaps had, which was over exercising and under eating. And again, that puts more stress on the body. Cortisol levels rise, and you will actually, gain weight if you don't eat enough. You also cannot build muscle fueling it. And that, for women, again, in perimenopause, and actually any age, it should be protein. So, protein is an absolutely key macronutrient that will heal, repair your muscle. It helps you balance your blood sugar levels. It helps balance your hormones. So, I'll work with women, and they'll be like, yeah, but I don't eat lunch until 1 o'clock. And I'm like, well, what are you doing? Your body is crying out for food, and often it gets that food and it goes, someone's feeding me, and it lays down and it stores the fat because it doesn't know when it's going to get its next meal. So my biggest change, and the biggest change I see with women I work with, is making them eat 3 wholesome protein, fiber, carb, colourful plates of food 3 times a day. And making sure they eat so they are full, so that they can then have another meal. So trying to leave like 4 hours between meals. Your body needs to rest and digest and, get everything going. And to avoid snacking, because that's one of the biggest things I see with women. And the reason they're snacking is because they're doing this fasting thing. And once they put something in their mouth and their body goes, it just doesn't stop.
Yeah, funny you should say that. Actually, I had a conversation with a woman the other day that was telling me she was starving hungry, so she was eating sort of biscuits, and she said, "I'm starving because I've been fasting for the last 11 hours." And I was thinking, well, there's no point in fasting for 11 hours then eating biscuits. That makes no sense to me what you're doing. And again, she's a woman that is going through post-menopause, so he's suffering with different things. I was thinking that cannot be good for you, but there seems to be a big sort of push for these. I'm fasting, or I'm doing this diet where I only eat kangaroo skin, or something like ridiculous,
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. If you're fasting, eat protein. Fasting in your body, protein.
But is fasting is that something you would recommend? Because my view on it would be, I think we stop doing very natural things that our bodies naturally want. I'm very much I try to listen to my body enough. If I feel like I need to eat something, I'll eat it. And I think our body's way of naturally fasting is sleeping. So I think I get 8 hours sleep. For me, I'm fasting for 8 hours because I love food. And as soon as I wake up, I think I need to eat something, and I'll eat the whole day. But to me, a natural fasting is your sleep. I don't think you need to prolong it any longer.
Yeah, I agree with you. There are a million schools of thought about fasting around your cycle, doing this and that. But what I would say to anyone, again, in this midlife phase, we are dealing with so much. Why add more stress to your life by kind of overthinking everything? And as you've just completely said, you fast overnight. So again, what I suggest to women is have their last meal, if they do want to do it, at like around about 7 o'clock at night, and then have breakfast at 9 o'clock. So you've got that. I mean, that's a 14-hour window, and that's plenty long enough. And I really don't think, and I'm not a nutritionist, I really don't think women need to be doing any more than that. But it is interesting because I think, again, like breakfast, and I always like saying this, because breakfast for me, I will have eggs pretty much every morning, maybe some eggs, some broccoli, flaxseed sprinkled on top, avocado. So I'm looking at proteins, fats, fiber, all of those things. If I have Greek yogurt, which I know a lot of people recommend, again, it's really high in protein, my brain for some reason thinks that it wants something sweet for the rest of the day. So I know that Greek yogurt for me doesn't necessarily work in balancing my blood sugars. And again, I don't need a monitor or an app to tell me that. I've worked it out for myself. And I think that is the problem, is that we rely quite heavily in these days, in this day and age, on external monitors to help us gauge what we need. You know what you need because you know how your body feels. And it's exactly what you've just said. When you wake up, that's what you want to do. And that works for you. When I wake up and I do my routine, that works for me, but it's not going to necessarily work for somebody else. The chances are it won't. And I think that is one of the biggest things in life. And with social media, we're all so flipping confused as to what's true, what's not, what's snake poison, what's real, what should I be doing, how should I eat, should I do this? And that's one of the biggest things I think is so terrifying for so many midlife women, and for anybody, but obviously I specialize in that demographic, is don't believe what everyone is showing you they're doing. I think that's my biggest thing. So they might be saying they're doing that. The chances are they're not. So just find out what works for you. Take the little bits of nuggets that do work and put them into your life. But I guess that's kind of a really key part of this journey.
So moving on to the final thing I want to talk about is, and it's a two-way thing, is how the effect of that menopause and post-menopause has on relationship and dating as well, because a lot of the people that watch the show are sort of coming out of relationships in their 40s, which, like you've alluded to, maybe due to changes in their life, and then are starting new relationships or looking to date, or are already in existing relationships. Because from the conversations I've had with people, like men's involvement as well and men's understanding can have a big influence on these decisions as well. So what effects can this have, and what can people do to help, and what can men do, more importantly, to help sort of that transition into a different stage?
Yeah. I mean, I think, like, from my own personal experience, it was a really, really difficult time. And like, I was very angry with everybody, and I'm very honest about it. Like, in my book, I've been honest about my socials. I was really angry with my kids. I was really angry with my husband. I did a lot of shouting and a lot of questioning. Also, you know, as we have that decline in estrogen, your sexual relationship changes. You lose confidence. You might not want to have as much sex as you had. And then I think your partner might feel like you don't love them anymore. And it's not that you don't, it's just that you're tired, you're exhausted. You know, with some of the night sweats that women have and the sleeplessness they have, they just crippled. So I think, like, by having open conversations and saying, I mean, that sounds like the dumpy thing, it's not you, it's me. But, you know, by saying, I'm going through this life transition and I need your support right now. I love you. Let's get through it. You know, can open doors to having that conversation. Obviously, it is really important to address anything more, you know, it could be something more fundamental, underlying. But I think if you can try for a good, you know, 6 or 7 months and support your partner on that journey and be understanding and be patient, it could be interesting to see what the outcome could be, rather than just assuming that they don't love you or that your needs aren't being met. Because as a woman myself who has cared for children, young adults, you know, I think for men, they feel they just feel like they're not part of the picture. So sort of they withdraw, you withdraw, and you know the lines just get really, really crossed. So I think having a really open conversation and just saying, this is how I'm feeling. I do still love you, but I'm just, you know, you might not be able to explain it, but could you just bear with me, you know, and support me on this and see where we are, I think is really, really important. Equally, if a woman is having any genitourinary symptoms where sex is painful, you know, all of those things, she might feel really embarrassed to talk about it. So if any woman is listening and that's you, please don't be embarrassed. There are a million things out there that you can do to help you, but talk to your partner and tell your partner that. Equally, if there are any men listening, you know, have those conversations with your partner. Just ask them and just say, you know, is it because of this? So opening those doors to allow that communication, because that is key, is obviously fundamental to managing, you know, those relationships, and actually helping that woman with her confidence is really key. So I think that would be like my biggest thing, is to have those open conversations and also have them with the kids. I remember saying to my kids, you know, I drop my kids off at school sometimes, but in tears and angry, and I felt like crap for the whole day. You know, and again, that plays into your self-confidence. Saying to them, look, I'm sorry, this is what I'm going through, and let's navigate this time together, so that you build your unit. I'm not going to say that's going to solve the problems. You may not be in love with your partner, and that does exacerbate it, and that's okay. You know, but it's working it out, and maybe don't be so quick to jump to the negatives, and that is especially to the men. Don't feel that you know, you're being shut out. It's just that woman doesn't quite know what's going on with herself at that time.
I think men's understanding is slowly getting better, but notoriously men are not great at discussing and being open about their own feelings, even to each other. So I think those conversations they're important to have, but they're probably quite difficult to have. And men seem to be driven, and I don't exclude myself from this, from physicality in a relationship. And if that's lacking, I think that's probably where the two, you know, the guy thinks, well, you know, physically my needs aren't being met. You don't want to do this anymore. So
Yeah.
that's where you can get the problems in a relationship. Would that be true? Maybe.
Yeah, I think like there's two faults there. And I think I mean, this is where we could really go deep into that whole thing. But like, I think intimacy for men and intimacy for women can be two very different things, and especially at perimenopause. So, intimacy, in my mind, is that hug at the end of the day, lying in bed, having a cuddle, feeling connected. And I know for men that can be very different. I don't speak for all men on that. And so I think it's working out what does that mean to you and how does that look? And having those conversations. I think if people do feel awkward about speaking to their partners, I did a podcast actually with Darren and Anna Goff, and I got Darren on because obviously, you've got MBE, cricket legend, talking about menopause, and what he said Anna would do would be to send podcasts to him. And so he could listen to podcasts and kind of understand what she was going through, so that if that conversation felt uncomfortable, she would just sort of, because obviously we're doing lots of driving, listen to this, and then we might not necessarily have to have a conversation about it, but it brings that awareness of it. But like equally, whilst we're talking about partners here, the likelihood is that perhaps your partner is also a colleague of someone. He might be an employer, he might be an employee. And so if we then kind of extend the awareness, like they will be going to the workplace as well with somebody, men and women who are also navigating this life stage, who are also having the same problems that they're having. And so I think that, again, that's why men really need to be aware, not just at home, but also in the workplace, because their employees, employers, colleagues, sisters, aunts, mothers, they're all going through this own experience themselves. So it doesn't just sit within that home space. It is, so much further. And I think that is the thing. They say 51% of the population will go through menopause, but they won't. 100% of us will be affected by menopause every single day.
I know that you've written a couple of books about this, and you've got your latest book there. Can you show us your latest book?
I can. It is here. So it's Owning Your Menopause, Fitter, Calmer, Stronger in 30 Days.
And that has everything that you've been speaking about today, about what to do fitness-wise, where to start, because I guess a lot of people will just be starting from standing still on this as well.
Yeah, so actually the really good thing about it, and the unique thing, is that on page, I'm not sure what page it is, but in chapter 3, what I did was I've got an inbuilt unique QR code. And actually anyone can do this. You could also do it if you want to lift weights from home. You scan the QR code and you get to set up a free account. It takes you out of the book, and I've recorded 30-day plan, a beginner's plan and an intermediate plan. So there are 60 workouts that you can do over 4 months in real time, on demand, and pre-recorded. So I am there with you in the room. I recorded them from my laundry room. I recorded them myself, because again, I don't want it to be, here I am in an amazing gym with all this equipment, and for women to go, well, that's not me. Like, I want women to be able to see me as being relatable. And, I'm in the laundry room. You don't need a space. Get yourself some dumbbells. And that absolutely this is accessible to anyone of any age and any ability.
Well, listen, Kate, thank you so much for joining us. I'll put all Kate's details on here. Go over to Kate's Instagram, check her out, and she's got loads of links on there to go and see her podcast and have a look at her book as well. So I just wanted to thank you for joining 50 Shades of Grey today. And it's been a learning experience for me. I feel better prepared for when I do meet someone. That'll be great for me. But thank you for joining us.
No, thank you. And as I said, I think it's amazing, because I think the more men we have in the space and the more men we have talking about it, the more people we can reach. And obviously, I have to say, bloody love the name of the podcast as well. I think it's brilliant.
Thank you. And guys, subscribe below, and we'll catch you soon, and have good weeks. Bye-bye.